Donald Trump is not only attempting to do extreme vetting of refugees who want to come to the country, he also is planning on doing extreme vetting of those seeking temporary visas. Now, make no mistake, vetting for temporary visas has been extremely rigorous anyway, but Trump believes that he needs to put more teeth to this extreme vetting process. And in fact, last week he signed an executive order which got absolutely no attention in the press whatsoever. So let me give you the details of that executive order. So he signed this order last week and it rescinded an Obama-era goal to speed up visa processing. Now, some of you might be wondering like, oh, speed up the process, what does that mean? That doesn't sound safe. Well, the only thing that Obama wanted to do was ensure that within a certain amount of time, people applying for visas would be able to get an interview. That way, members of the government would be able to determine whether or not this individual is safe to allow into the country. So a 2012 order signed by former President Obama instructed the State Department to ensure that 80% of non-immigrant visa applicants are interviewed within 3 weeks of receipt of application. So again, this doesn't mean that you just let them in. It just means, hey, how about we interview them within 3 weeks? Which doesn't sound unreasonable. Well, Donald Trump did think it was unreasonable. In fact, his White House spokesperson says the president expects careful, accurate vetting of visa applicants, not a rushed process to accommodate an arbitrary deadline. Now, there are, unintended downsides to what Trump has done. By signing that executive order, he is negatively impacting innocent people that actually do add some benefits to our economy. So for instance, tourists from certain countries have to apply for these temporary visas. And if Trump is making it even more difficult for them to travel here for tourism reasons, well then they're unlikely to apply or even waste their time trying to come here, right? So the tourism industry is already dealing with some of the negative downsides of Trump's presidency. Also keep in mind that we have a number of students who travel abroad, they come to the United States in order to study. If you lengthen the process to obtain the visa, many of them are unlikely to be able to start classes on time. And then finally, there's the issue of H-1B visas. These are individuals, foreigners, who are hired to come into the country and work for various businesses. So this is not a business-friendly policy. This is certainly not a good policy for people who want to come here and use their talents in order to contribute to our companies.
From a president who pitches himself as the big business-friendly guy, let me tell you, we're going to revolutionize the way we do things in the USA, and it's all going to be about business and jobs. And Ann is absolutely right. I mean, there's a tremendous business incentive here because there's research being done, there's all kinds of business development being done with other countries. I mean, one of the things that technology has done is it's brought us into sort of an interlocking relationship with other nations, and oftentimes we need those people from those other nations here working on things from an economic standpoint to help make this a more robust economy. This is ridiculous. You need a deadline on visas of some kind, right? I love that verbiage. They're so good at that crap verbiage, this administration. Right. Some arbitrary deadline, as though it's not arbitrary. We need a deadline that's reasonable so that people can make a plan, so that businesses can thrive, and so that tourism, which by the way is not an insubstantial business in this country, so tourism can thrive. So they're serious. In addition to all the other aspects to this, there's a serious business problem with this entire proposal.
There is, and it's interesting because the Republican Party claims that they're very much pro-business, but again, this is going to hurt businesses that do rely on these H-1B visas or H-1B visa holders to come in and contribute to their companies.
Not to mention it's summertime, and the tourist dollars that matter so much to so many destinations for foreign tourists coming into the United States at this time of year are unbelievable, and especially from the southern hemisphere visitor tourists, people coming from everywhere from Argentina to Australia to South, people coming to the United States. It totally changes the way that happens, and that does affect chambers of commerce.
So you're saying it's winter there, they're coming here for summer.
Exactly.
And the timing on this couldn't be worse from a tourism standpoint. I mean, this is really where a lot of tourism dollars get spent.
And by the way, let me just absolutely clarify what I think is the most important part of all of this, right? what Obama wanted, again, wasn't to ease the process for people attempting to obtain these visas. The only thing he wanted to do was, hey, let's have a more reasonable time span in which these people can expect to get interviewed. So they're still going through the same vetting channels. They're still getting, their background checks done. They're still getting interviewed. Everything is being done the way it's supposed to be done. And by the way, the Obama administration was criticized by people on the left for being a little too strict when it came to temporary visas for travelers. And Trump wants to take it even further. And so this is something that will run in tandem to the travel ban. So this is separate. I'm not the travel ban, I'm sorry. Yes, the travel ban. It will run tandem to that. And this is also very different from the vetting process that he wants to utilize when it comes to refugees. So people who are trying to come into the country and essentially seek asylum because of what they're experiencing in their own countries. It's crazy. And by the way, we oftentimes mention what the vetting process is. We give the audience details. But for those of you who might be curious, what was the vetting process under the Obama administration? I have the details to that. So an individual from Iraq, for instance, who wants to visit the United States as a tourist, first fills out an online application for the visa. Before the interview, information in the application is run against US terrorism watch lists and databases. Any derogatory information would be flagged for a specially trained State Department consular office in the US embassy or consulate in or near the person's home country who conducts the interview. For high-risk countries, the Department of Homeland Security is involved to some extent. At that point, the visa applicant needs to show proof that a return ticket has been purchased, a defined place to stay in the US, and ties to his or her home country. And this is something that the traveler would provide during the interviewing process. If and when the person is approved for a visa, photos and fingerprints are taken. Before departing for the US, all air passengers coming into the US are subject to information analysis by officials on the ground overseas and at the National Targeting Center in Virginia. Finally, once the traveler arrives at the US airport, an officer with Customs and Border Protection will have access to all of the information collected through the targeting center, will ask the person for his or her fingerprints again to match with the original set, and will ask questions again about the trip to the United States. So again, it is a lengthy process. It is a long, detailed process. It's not like, I know that this country really thrives on fear, right? And the fear mongering by the right works to their benefit time and time again. But no one had open borders. No one said, hey, you know what? You want to come to the US? All right, no background checks, no nothing, just show up. It doesn't work that way. I know the Trump administration will have you believe that, but that is not the case.
These were stringent, they were rigorous, and they were right, right? And that they seem to be, like, I would say there are very few people who would call them totally unreasonable. I should also clarify, I said Australia before. Of course, Australia, part of the visa waiver program, so you wouldn't need a visa anyway coming from Australia, but basically painting a picture of that side of the world. But when you get here, when you get to this country, and that is what you have to go through, that's pretty rigorous, and I think that's sufficient in many cases. And then those flags are raised. But as you said, Anna, there's never been, or certainly in recent history, been you just waltz right into this country and you pick up your bag at baggage claim and you go to your hotel or your home.
I think there's also an aspect of this, and you see it in so much of these executive orders. There's just an aspect of this that is anti-Obama. I didn't think you could really govern this way, but they really are governing this way. If Obama's name is on something, they get rid of it.
It's almost as if, Mark, just like you guys both remember the White House Correspondents' Dinner where President Obama was ribbing Donald Trump, who was in attendance that night. And they were good digs, but they were digs. To me, it's almost as if he thinks about that with everything he does. That he is that little boy in the playground that is pissed off at the kid who teased him, and he is just going to do everything he can now that he's the king of the playground.
And in this case,
I don't even mean that like facetiously or sarcastically. I really think that matters to him.
I 100% agree with you. And if you just look at the way that they're legislating, and they're legislating a lot through executive order, the first order of business was to undo a lot of what President Obama had done. And even in this specific case, they want to change what Obama had done. And it's important because Anna laid it out. It's a rigorous process already. But the headline steal is making Obama's immigration laws or immigration rules tougher, putting teeth in President Obama's immigration policy. When you get that headline, that's a headline that Donald Trump can warm up to. And I mean, it seems so superficial, but in an election that was ruled by superficial messaging, and in a president who is as shallow as they come, this is the kind of thing that makes for legislation that he stands behind.
Yeah.
So I think it's all about, a lot about that anyway.
Yeah, you're actually absolutely right about that. And you can tell based on the way headlines are written about this particular story, because you got to keep in mind, not every American has the time or the resources to sit down, read every detail of every story, understand the nuance behind it. And so a lot of people are educated based on what they read in headlines. And so the headline from The Hill, for instance, says, Trump quietly puts teeth into his extreme vetting policy. That's a very positive headline. Right. And it doesn't really give you a sense of all of the negative ramifications of what he's doing.
Nor does it even touch on the fact that he's not really doing much, just lengthening the process. That's not putting teeth in anything. There's no creative legislation going on with that.
Right.
But again, as Anna says, it'll steal the click, right? You see that one thing and you go, oh, yeah, well, one of the things I like about Donald Trump is, he's made this, he's put some teeth into our immigration policies.
Definitely. And these are the types of things that when you have executive orders, you have to do, because when you say them, you're just saying them, and then this is the enactment of that. We'll talk about a few more of those later, but this is exactly how you're characterizing it.
The last thing I want to say on this, because I think this security thing, when you talk about the fact that they've sold security and that we're frightened, I think that's so right. And security is clearly going to be a big theme with this administration for his entire 4 years. That under that umbrella of security, you can do a lot of stuff, like take people's civil rights away. Right. So right now we're messing with people who are coming here and you go, well, I'm not from, wherever that is, and I'm not from these countries that are affected. I live here. Yeah, but after 9/11, all of us who lived here, we gave up a bunch of civil rights. We were scared, right? Yeah. I mean, it was security. And they sold us on that fact that, hey, look.
Everything fell under that. That was the Patriot Act. That was exactly what happened with the Patriot Act.
And Fourth Amendment goes away.
Robert Byrd in the Senate talking about how crazy creating the Department of Homeland Security was, right? When you think about that, in the aftermath of 9/11, people standing up and saying that, and you're not hearing enough about this stuff. One of the interesting things I think from this was Rex Tillerson, this hiring freeze he put in at the State Department, right? It's almost a way to say we don't have enough people to process the visas. It's a way of doing it in a backdoor, sneaky way to say we're just not going to hire. We're hiring freeze, so we can't hire enough people to process the visas.
They've done that in a lot of different arms of government. There are aspects of this administration that are, I think, really dedicated to that kind of governing, which is, hey, we just don't have the manpower. Sorry.
Right. And keep in mind there are so many positions that Trump still hasn't filled in national security positions, by the way. So that's something you should also keep in mind while he pretends like he's concerned about your national security.
But he was really pissed about only 8 people on the Supreme Court.
You don't like ads? I hear you, brother. You know how you can avoid ads for the Young Turks? Become a Young Turks member and get all the content ad-free. TYTnetwork.com/join.